Hey, today we're going to look at fractions, specifically equivalent fractions. So when we consider fractions, they are a proportion of a whole amount. So if we take a look at a representation here, we have got a rectangle and part of it is shaded green. So if we split this rectangle up, we can we can say how much of this rectangle is green by how much we've actually split the whole amount up into. And this is what's known as proportion when we compare the amount that we're interested in this case the green section, to how many parts the whole rectangle has been split into. And that is what a fraction is. It is a way of expressing a proportion. So here we have got a rectangle and it has been split into 4 parts. Now the part that is green is only one of those 4 parts. So as a fraction we would write this as 1/4 or 1/4. And essentially what that means is 1 out of 4 parts are green. So 1 out of 4 parts are green, and we write it using numerals as 1/4 or 1/4 or 1/4, however you wish to express that. When we consider fractions and equivalent fractions, now equivalent, you get a clue for what it means in the title. It comes from the word equal, which means the same as or the same. We can do this with our fractions, and we can write this amount, this proportion, in different ways, and they mean the same fraction, they mean the same proportion. So for instance, if we split this same rectangle, instead of splitting it into 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, we split it into 8 parts, like this. Now you'll notice that the amount of green area within the rectangle hasn't changed. It's the same amount, but the amount of parts we've split the actual whole rectangle into has changed. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 parts now. So if I wanted to know how many parts of this rectangle were green, what the proportion of parts are green, once again we have now got 8 parts, so we would say 8, and 2 of those parts are green. So as a fraction, whoa, we've just crossed a bit of it out, we would write it as 2/8 or 2/8. And in this case the proportion of green to the whole amount, the whole rectangle, would be 2/8. And if we compare those two visualizations, so we agreed that the first one was 1/4, so 1 out of 4 were green, and for the second one it was 2 out of 8 were green. These fractions here are known as equivalent fractions, which means they are equal. They represent the same proportion of the whole. And as a basic way of looking at it, you can see that in these two representations, the amount that is green is the same. The difference between the two is that we have split this rectangle into more parts than we have with this one. So in this rectangle we split it into 8 parts, and in this rectangle we have split it into 4 parts. So this is a way of visually seeing what these equivalent fractions mean. So 2/8 and 1/4 or 1/4 are known as equivalent fractions. They represent the same amount. It's just they look different because in one of them, the 2/8, we've split the whole amount, in this case the whole rectangle, into more parts than we've split this rectangle into. But actually they represent the same amount. And this is what equivalent fractions are. They are two fractions that represent the same proportion of a whole. They just may look different because in one of them, in one of them we have split the whole into more parts. The denominator is different, and therefore the numerator will be different as well. And if we have another look at this representation, now this one shows us it in a slightly different way. So what we have in this first one, the fraction that is blue in this diagram here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts that this rectangle has been split into, and the amount that are blue is 1. So it's 1 out of 5, or 1/5. In this second representation, we are not considering the fraction of one object, we are considering the fraction of a group of objects. And so if we want to know the fraction or the proportion of these objects that are blue, we would follow the same steps. We would count how many parts there are, in this case how many objects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the amount that are blue are 2, so it's 2 out of 10. Now these are also equivalent oh, that's a bit of a wonky line. There we go. These fractions are also equal. And we can actually have a look at why that is. If we actually split this object into 2 parts, we would see that it represents the same proportion, 1 out of 5. It's just with the second fraction we have 2 groups of 5 parts, and so we have 2 blue pieces. But if we just simplified it and we took 1 part, which would have the same proportion, that would now have 1/5. So these are also equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are 2 fractions that may look different. They may have a different denominator and they may have a different numerator, but they represent the same amount of a whole, or more accurately, they represent the same proportion of a whole. Okay, so that's equivalent fractions. In the next video we'll have a look at how we can find equivalent fractions, but until then, have fun with equivalencies, and I'll see you in the next video.